My name is Orisa, and I am 26 years old. At my dad's retirement party, he gave a speech thanking everyone except me, and that silence was louder than the applause, echoing off the hotel ballroom walls that night. The room was packed with nearly 70 of his colleagues, managers and executives all dressed in crisp suits and polite smiles, the kind of crowd that measures worth by titles and years of service. I stood near the back beside my mother, my hands clenched around a glass I hadn't touched, already feeling invisible before it even happened. My dad stood proudly at the podium, chest out, voice confident, listing names one by one, his mentors, his team, his friends, even my mother for always supporting his career. Each name got applause, each pause built expectation, and then he ended the speech. Just like that, no mention of me, no daughter, no acknowledgement that I even existed. A man near the front laughed awkwardly and whispered something to another guest. Someone else finally asked out loud, half joking, "What about your daughter?" My dad didn't hesitate. He laughed into the microphone and said, "She's not worth mentioning." The words hit me harder than if he had slapped me in front of everyone. She's not worth mentioning. 70 colleagues watched. I felt my face burn, my ears ring, and my mother stiffened beside me without saying a word. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was the summary of my entire childhood compressed into one cruel sentence. Growing up, my parents treated my achievements like inconveniences. When I graduated top of my class, they said it was luck. When I got my first job at 21, my dad told me it was cute, but not a real career. When I paid my own way through certifications and night courses, they told relatives I was still figuring life out. Meanwhile, every tiny thing my dad did was celebrated like a national holiday. This retirement party was supposed to be his victory lap. And apparently, I didn't deserve to be part of the story. As the laughter faded and the crowd shifted uncomfortably, I felt something inside me go cold and clear. I had spent years hoping one day they'd be proud of me, that one day my dad would look at me and say my name with respect. Standing there, listening to him dismiss me as if I were nothing, I realized that day was never coming. I stepped away from my mother, my heels clicking against the floor as I walked forward. People turned. Whispers followed me. I could feel every eye tracking me as I approached the podium. My dad frowned, confused and annoyed. Like I was interrupting an important meeting, I took the microphone gently from his hand and looked out at the room. My voice didn't shake when I spoke. I said, "Before I leave, there's one thing Dad forgot to mention." The room went silent. I reached into my bag and pulled out a neatly organized folder. Thick, heavy, and labeled. I handed it to him first, but he didn't even look at it. He scoffed and passed it to his boss, who had been standing just behind him with a polite smile frozen on his face. When his boss opened it, the color drained from his expression, page by page. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. That folder wasn't emotional. It was factual. Contracts, emails, reports, documents. I had collected over years, quietly, carefully, while being ignored and underestimated. I had learned early that no one was coming to defend me, so I learned how to defend myself. My dad tried to laugh it off, saying I was being dramatic, but the boss raised a hand to stop him. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm breaks. My mother finally looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time. I set the microphone back on the podium and said nothing else. There was nothing left to say. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, my heart pounding but my steps steady. Behind me, I heard murmurs turn into sharp whispers, and then into a stunned, oppressive silence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking to make my parents comfortable. I wasn't begging to be seen. I had been called not worth mentioning, but as the elevator doors closed and the noise faded, I knew this was only the beginning of what would finally be. Mentioned and remembered. The elevator ride down felt longer than the years I had spent being ignored. But when the doors opened, I didn't look back, because I already knew what was happening upstairs. I could feel it in my bones. The way truth travels faster than excuses once it's finally set free. I stepped outside into the cool night air and breathed like someone who had just escaped a burning building. Not because I was scared, but because I was finally safe from pretending. My phone buzzed before I even reached my car, messages stacking up. Missed calls from my mother. A voicemail from an unknown number that I later realized belonged to my dad's boss. I didn't answer, not yet. I sat behind the wheel and replayed the moment in my head. The exact second my dad laughed and said, "She's not worth mentioning," and how 70 colleagues watched my face as if I were a stain on the carpet. I remembered standing up, walking to the podium, and saying clearly, before I leave, "There's one thing Dad forgot to mention," handing him a folder, and how when his boss opened it, the room went silent. That silence wasn't just shock, it was recognition. The folder wasn't revenge. It was accountability. For 3 years, I had worked as a consultant for the same company my dad was retiring from, under a subsidiary name he never bothered to ask about because it was beneath him. I had audited systems, streamlined operations, fixed errors that saved the company millions, and documented everything. Emails showing how my dad took credit for work he didn't do. Reports proving he blocked younger employees, especially women, from promotions. Compliance warnings he ignored because he believed retirement made him untouchable. I didn't steal anything. I didn't fabricate a single page. I simply kept records, because when you grow up being dismissed, you learn to let proof speak for you. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the first headline was already live in the company's internal network. A routine review, triggered during a retirement event. Routine. That word made me laugh out loud for the first time that night. The next morning, my mother showed up at my door with swollen eyes and a face I didn't recognize, fear mixed with regret. She tried to explain that my dad didn't mean it, that it was a joke, that I should have handled it privately. I listened calmly and asked her one question. Where was privacy when I was called not worth mentioning in front of 70 people? She had no answer. 2 days later, the company announced my dad's retirement. Benefits were under review pending investigation. Invitations vanished. Friends stopped calling him. The same people who clapped the loudest suddenly had meetings to attend. My dad finally called me, his voice sharp, demanding, asking how I could do this to him. I told him I didn't do anything to him. I simply told the truth when he erased me. Silence followed, the kind that finally made sense. Weeks passed, and the investigation concluded quietly but decisively. His legacy was revised, his final title amended. The story he told about himself no longer matched the record. As for me, I was offered a senior role by the same boss who opened my folder first. Not as a favor, but as recognition. I declined the public announcement and accepted the position anyway, on my terms, because I didn't need applause to know my worth anymore. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter who was not worth mentioning had become impossible to ignore. At a family gathering months later, my parents spoke softly around me, careful, unsure, like people standing near a mirror they're afraid to face. I wasn't angry. I was finished. Finished chasing approval. Finished shrinking my achievements. Finished believing silence meant peace. Some people think revenge is loud and messy, but sometimes it's quiet, precise, and undeniable. Sometimes it's standing up in a room, where you were erased and calmly reminding everyone, including yourself, that you were always there. If this story hit you, if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told you weren't worth mentioning, stay with this channel, because these stories matter. Make sure you subscribe now, so you don't miss the next one. My name is Eloin, and I'm 28 years old, the day the bank said I owed $60,000 on a mortgage I never signed. My life split cleanly into a before and an after, and I remember standing in my small rented apartment, phone pressed to my ear, listening to a calm voice explain that I was officially delinquent on a loan big, enough to crush everything I had ever worked for. While my hands shook so badly I had to sit on the floor, I asked the woman to repeat herself because surely I'd misheard, but she didn't. She explained it again, slower this time as if I were stupid, telling me the address of a house I'd never seen, in a neighborhood I'd never visited, purchased under my full legal name. I laughed at first, an ugly sound that surprised even me, and said there must be some mistake because I had never applied for a mortgage in my life, let alone one that size. But she told me the documents were clear, the signatures matched, and the account had already been active for months. When I hung up, the silence felt loud, and the first thought that came to my mind wasn't fear. It was my sister. Growing up, everyone always said she was the golden one. The dreamer, the one who deserved more because she wanted more, while I was the reliable one, the steady one, the one who could be leaned on. I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid, but the truth hit me in waves as I pulled my credit report and saw it in black and white. A massive loan, a perfect payment history at first, and then missed payments stacking like bricks on my chest. That was when it turned out my sister used my name to buy her dream house. And the realization made my stomach twist because it meant someone I loved had planned this, step by step with intent. I drove to my parents' house that evening, my mind replaying memories I had brushed off for years, how my sister always asked questions about my job, my income, my documents, how my parents would joke that I was good with paperwork and should help her, how they brushed off my discomfort whenever boundaries were crossed. When I confronted them, my sister cried instantly, saying she'd been desperate, that the bank wouldn't approve her loan, that she meant to refinance later and fix it. And my parents looked at me not with shock but with calculation. They asked me to calm down, told me I was overreacting, said family doesn't call the police on family, and then came the words that cut deeper than the debt itself. They asked me to make the payments, for now because my credit was already involved, and because it would ruin my sister's life if I didn't. I remember staring at them, realizing that in their story, I was the inconvenience, not the victim. That night, I didn't sleep. I gathered everything, emails, texts, signatures, timelines, and went to the police station with a knot in my throat, filing a report I never imagined I'd need against my own blood. Weeks passed in a blur of calls and letters, my parents alternating between guilt and anger, my sister switching between apologies and accusations, until they invited me to a family dinner to talk it out. I almost didn't go. But something in me needed to see their faces, when the truth could no longer be twisted. We sat around the table like nothing was wrong, plates clinking, small talk floating over a tension so thick I could taste it. And as my mother asked me to pass the salt, I reached into my bag instead. At dinner, I slid the police report across the table, watching the color drain from my sister's face as the paper stopped in front of her. The words identity theft clear and undeniable. The room went silent, and in that moment, I understood this wasn't just about money or a house. It was about who they thought I was, and who I was finally choosing to be, and the night was far from over. The silence after I slid the police report across the table felt heavier than the $860,000 debt ever had, and for a long moment no one spoke, as my sister stared at the paper like it might disappear if she didn't blink. My father was the first to react, pushing his chair back slightly, his voice tight as he asked what I thought I was doing. And that was when something inside me finally snapped into clarity. I told them exactly what I was doing, protecting myself, because the bank said I owed $860,000 on a mortgage I never signed, and no amount of family dinners or emotional pressure was going to change that reality. My sister broke down then, sobbing loudly, saying she never meant for it to go this far, that she just wanted a chance at a better life, that the house was her dream, and she thought I'd understand because I always handled things better. Hearing that hurt more than her confession, because it confirmed what I had suspected all along. They believed my stability existed to be exploited. My mother reached for my hand and asked me to think about the consequences. Not for me, but for my sister, reminding me how fragile she was, how the stress could ruin her marriage, her reputation, her future. And I pulled my hand away and asked them why my future had never mattered enough to protect. I told them that it turned out my sister used my name to buy her dream house. And instead of being horrified, they tried to make me responsible for cleaning up the mess, and that was something I could no longer accept. My father's tone hardened then, accusing me of betrayal, of choosing outsiders like the police over my own family, and I calmly explained that family doesn't steal identities, forge signatures, and gamble with someone else's life. The argument spiraled quickly, voices rising, blame flying, until I stood up, steadier than I felt, and told them the investigation was already underway, and there was nothing more to discuss. I walked out of that house knowing that whatever happened next would permanently change our relationships, but also knowing I had finally chosen myself. The weeks that followed were brutal: lawyers, interviews, frozen accounts, sleepless nights, but slowly, painfully, the truth did its work. The mortgage was flagged as fraud, the debt removed from my record, and the house that had nearly destroyed me became evidence instead of leverage. My sister stopped calling when she realized tears wouldn't fix what she'd done, and my parents' messages shifted from anger to silence, a silence that hurt but also confirmed I had made the right choice. One afternoon, I got the final confirmation letter from the bank stating I was no longer liable, and I sat on my floor again, just like that first day, except this time I cried in relief instead of terror. I didn't feel victorious or vengeful. I felt free, and that freedom came with a clarity I wish I'd learned sooner. That love without boundaries is just permission for harm. Looking back now, I understand that night at dinner was never about reconciliation. It was about control, and when that control failed, the truth had nowhere left to hide. At dinner, I slid the police report across the table, and in doing so, I slid myself out of a role I had been forced into my entire life. If you're listening to my story and you've ever been pressured to carry someone else's burden just because you're strong enough, I want you to know that strength isn't silent suffering. It's choosing honesty, even when it costs you comfort. This experience didn't just expose a crime. It exposed a pattern, and breaking it was the hardest, most necessary thing I've ever done. If stories like mine resonate with you, if you believe truth deserves a voice and accountability, matters even when it's painful, then don't walk this road alone. Subscribe to the channel now, because more real stories like this are coming. And sometimes hearing them is the first step to standing up for yourself.